Another part of social cognition or thinking is tied to perception, meaning like how we take in information about other people. So, if you think about it through the course of a day, we're all kind of like working like little scientists. We're always kind of like noticing some of the things that people do and then trying to figure out why they're doing what they do. So, we're kind of looking for like a cause and effect, okay? And what we know is that um, as we work to like make explanations for behavior, we tend to look at other people's behaviors and give causal explanations. So here's what I saw, and here is what made that happen. Okay. However, when we're explaining our own day, when we're explaining our own behaviors, we tend to consider the situational factors that might be causing our behavior. So attributions are sort of just like characteristics or traits or like things that we assign. And so we make internal attributions, typically, which are personal, when we're trying to make sense of other people's behavior. And we make external or situational attributions when we try to explain our own behavior. So it's important to know those two things as part of attribution theory because they kind of influence all of what we're taking in about other people. And if we tend to have one set of standards for how we explain our behavior, but a different set of standards for how we explain someone else's behavior, then we can kind of start to understand how our attributions and our perception might not be very accurate. Okay. Another thing to be aware of with all of this is what's called self-fulfilling prophecy. And what tends to happen is that we create expectations of other people, and over time, those people will unknowingly adjust their behavior or their performance to meet those expectations. So, for example, teachers that have high expectations, like I do of you, and believe that you're going to be able to work hard and you're going to be able to attain solid grades and really good knowledge for the AP Psych test, you will tend to increase your behavior to fulfill my prophecy. So you'll tend to work harder to try to fulfill that expectation. However, if I have low expectations of you, so if I'm sort of like, yeah, you guys aren't going to be able to do this anyway, then you're going to start to read that and feel that, and you're not going to work as hard. And again, you will tend to fulfill my prophecy. What I think is interesting about this is if you apply it to friend groups or like the people that you date. Like if you have that friend who's sometimes late and then your group starts making fun of them as like the late friend, right? In my group, it's Kim. So it's like, oh, make sure that we tell Kim 30 minutes early because you know she's going to be late. And all of a sudden, over time, Kim is not only 30 minutes late and she's not only sometimes late, she is late all the time and by a significantly higher margin. So think about how that influences us. All right, so those are two of the foundational things that just in general influence our social perception and that we need to be aware of. However, the rest of the terms that matter are all showing us how we kind of like screw up our social perception of others. So that's interesting, right? There's like two baseline terms, and then there are 5 things that we need to be aware of that are errors or biases in our thinking. So, unfortunately, on this list of 5, 3 of them kind of fall along the same line in being the top 10 most commonly confused. So, I'm going to kind of try to start with those. The fundamental attribution error says that we have a tendency to overestimate personality influences and underestimate situational influences when explaining the behavior of others. So notice the fundamental attribution error comes into play when I'm trying to explain other people's behavior. All right? Now, self-serving bias, if you drop down to that one, that's the tendency to attribute my successes to personal characteristics, but my failures to factors that are outside of my control, meaning like situational or environmental factors. So notice, this is what happens when I'm explaining my own behavior. And then finally, the actor-observer bias that kind of combines these two together in a way. And this just says that we have a tendency to attribute other people's behavior to internal causes while attributing our own behavior, especially in negative circumstances, to external causes. Okay, so I'm going to use showing up late to class. Okay, so for teachers and students, let's say that a student is showing up late to a teacher's class, and that teacher has to kind of make a snap conclusion about them because it's early in the semester and they tend to be repeating their behavior. So that teacher jumps to, this kid is irresponsible, they're disrespectful, they don't care about school. Think about that. Those are like really big personal or internal characteristics to apply to someone just because they're showing up late to class, right? Now, let's say that I'm showing up late to class and I'm the teacher. When I show up late to class, I don't think to myself, I'm disrespectful, I'm irresponsible, and I don't care about my job. I would never think that, right? Instead, I try to process through all of the situational reasons why I'm late. I had to run down and pick up my copies, and on the way, 5 different students stopped me. The copy machine was jammed or broken. I had to go to the bathroom, and I can't go to the bathroom bell to bell, right? Like, notice all of those situational things that I would consider before I would apply I'm lazy or irresponsible or don't care. All right? So think about that scenario and then apply the 3, right? When I was explaining the behavior of the student, I used the fundamental attribution error. I didn't consider any of the situational reasons why they might be late, right? Maybe they walk from the K-Wing, maybe it's after lunch and they get stuck in the Culver's drive-through. I don't know, maybe they're going through a hard time with a friend, so they're spending more time with them in the halls walking them to class, right? Self-serving bias. So when I was explaining my own behavior, then when it was like a bad thing, which is showing up late, I attribute it to factors outside of my control. Whereas if it was like a good thing, I'd probably claim, I'd claim the credit for it. And then actor-observer bias is just kind of the summarizing, right? If you put them both together, then what it's saying was when I explained the student's behavior, I attributed it to internal causes. And when I explained my own behavior, I attributed it to external or situational causes. Okay. And then the last 2 terms are belief in a just world and false consensus effect. So belief in a just world is exactly that. It might be called the just world phenomenon. There's a couple variations of how they phrase it, but it's just the belief that people get what they deserve in life. Now notice that this is under the psychological biases, okay? So even though we kind of live in a society that's very individualistic, therefore we tend to teach people that if you just work hard and if you just follow the law and all of that, your life will work out, right? But that's not true. But it's not fun to say that to people, right? It's not fun to be like, well, it's kind of based on chance and we'll see what happens and what were you born into, and right? No, we don't do that. Instead, we just say work hard, keep your head down, follow the law, and life will work out. It's not really the way that it works. So if that's a bias, think about how it would influence our social perception of others if we believe the world is a fair place. We might walk down State Street and look at somebody who is potentially homeless on the street and think to ourselves, get a job, I have one, and just keep walking. Think about how minimizing that is, right? Or any of the other topics in our society that obviously aren't as simple as just the world's a fair place and you should be able to figure this out. Okay, it's really not. So then the last one is false consensus effect, and we see this a lot of times in classrooms. So the false consensus effect is the tendency to overestimate the extent to which other people agree with you. So false consensus. So I see this a lot with social issues like controversial issues. So in social psychology, the class, not this unit, we talk about like race and privilege and orientation and gender and all of those things, right? So somebody might speak up about, I don't know, same-sex marriage, and they make a really kind of liberal statement about it. And then somebody across the room makes maybe a little bit more of a conservative statement about it. And they judge them really harshly for it, right? They're like, oh my God, I can't believe that that person thinks that. How could they think that? And your judgment of that person is much harsher. But here's the deal. We hang out with people who think like us. At this age, a lot of your opinions are likely influenced by your family anyway, right? So we tend to think that other people agree with us because we surround ourselves with people who think like us, right? Dane County is a really liberal area, even if you yourself aren't liberal, whereas Waukesha County is a very conservative area, right? So depending on where you are, you might judge people more harshly if they disagree with you, when in actuality, there's not really a right or wrong to a lot of controversial issues, right? So that's the false consensus effect, and that leads us to make harsher judgments of others.